The moment we begin to fear the opinions of others and hesitate to tell the truth that is in us, and from the motives of policy are silent when we should speak, the divine floods of light and life no longer flow into our souls. Lately, as you have no doubt noticed, I've been putting a great deal of focus on the lost nation of Tartaria, the lost culture, civilization of Tartaria, that it existed mainly in Europe but had spread itself out to encompass most of the known world, or a good portion of the known world anyway. And it is a culture that was expunged from history around about the middle of the 19th century. And even looking at that, I would suggest that it wasn't actually the middle of the 19th century the final expunging happened, but actually in the middle of the 20th century, even later than what I thought it was. And for many people who are wondering about this and wondering about the existence of Tartaria and whether it was actually a real nation, it can be found on maps from the 1400s and 1500s. Pretty well anything before about the 1700s or 1800s, you'll find Tartaria on these maps. So I would suggest that the war to remove Tartaria from history and the war to destroy Tartaria very likely happened around the 16th or 17th century, very likely began around then. But as I said, it wasn't completed until as late as the middle of the 20th century. And as I said, early maps you can find this, and you can see the growth of the nation as well. If you look at maps from the 1400s and 1500s, you can see that it starts off with Tartaria being a reasonably sized country in northern Europe. And then it progresses, and it also begins to encompass areas of around near the Philippines. And then we see South America being coloured the same colour as Tartaria, and eventually we see North America becoming part of Tartaria as well, according to these maps. And just to put this in context in how it's presented in this document, I mean, we all know that history is written by the winners, and that whenever any particular nation wins a war against another country, they generally rewrite the history to portray themselves in a positive light. For example, if you look at English history or Russian history, you'll find that the British and Russian really never did anything wrong. When you look at their own history of the events, it was always the other guys who were the bad guys, and they were always going into the places they went to heal the situation or to improve the situation or to bring civilization to the natives or some kind benevolent purpose. This is what we're always told in history books. I mean, we can kind of read between the lines and know differently, but generally when you read the history of a country, if that country is the one who wrote that history, then that country itself will always be portrayed in a positive light. Of course they will. That's just the way they do it. So bearing that in mind and taking that into account, when looking at this CIA document, you can see the excuse that they've created for rewriting the history. And you can tell that the authors of the document are, of course, attempting to portray the West in a positive light. And again, Tartaria is a country that nobody even seems to know existed. There was a huge worldwide power, according to the maps. It isn't in any history books in any countries, not just the Russians. It isn't in American history books. It isn't in any country's history books. And yet here it is being mentioned in this document, which was declassified in 1999 and is referencing a meeting that took place in 1944. It's very important for people to understand that what we are presenting with this whole concept of Tartaria, the whole concept of this being a worldwide culture, the concept of there being free energy, all of the things that we've talked about in the last few shows and a lot of the things that a lot of people are talking about, it's very important for people to keep it in context and realize that this is a hypothesis. We don't know what happened. We're piecing it together and we're trying to figure it out. And being that it is a hypothesis, it's very important that people keep true to the facts in what information they're presenting to people and keep everything above board. Don't put false concepts and false ideas out there. Don't stretch the truth. Sure, okay, put concepts out there, but make sure they are presented as being a hypothesis. Be very, very careful of what you are stating as fact, because this is a very, very important issue. Being that it is such an important issue, it's imperative that we do not muddy the waters with this information. And by wanting things to be true, wanting our ideas to be true, and cherry-picking information or falsifying information to make our ideas or our hypothesis seem more acceptable and seem more true, because all we do by doing that is muddy the waters. And having said that, what I want to address is the concept of free energy being supplied by Tartarian buildings. Now, this is a very, very real possibility that this is what these buildings were doing. But having said that, we don't know that that's what they were doing. And there has been a certain amount of, frankly, disinformation being released about Tartarian energy buildings. But this is a huge mystery. I mean, what happened with Tartaria and the fact that this nation was there and what they were probably capable of, it's a huge mystery to all of us. We're just unraveling it at the moment, and all we've done is scratch the surface. So before making any wild claims, it's very, very important that people look deeper and put things in perspective. That's the important thing that people need to be doing, is asking questions. Now, if you ask the right questions, you can encourage people to ask the right questions, then the right answers will present themselves by default. It's just getting to the right question. And that is truly one of the big problems that we face today, is that people simply don't question. They don't ask enough questions. They simply roll over on command and do what they're told and never ask why. If people were to look at the system and simply ask why their lives are in the state that it's in, it would probably make a difference as well. But people don't even pay attention to that. They just think it's normal for them to be living in this state of debt slavery. It's what they've grown up with, so it's what they think reality is. And they never question it. They never ask about the monetary system. They never ask why they have to pay to be alive, and why we are constantly at war all the time, and why things just continue to get harder and more difficult. If we have societies that are constructed to serve people, why is it that people are discarded so easily and so readily and so often within the constructs of these societies? These are questions people need to ask, and they just don't. They're so busy running on the treadmill, collecting the paper they need to pay to be alive, that they never ask why that fee is required, why they have to pay in the first place. They just think that it's just the way things are, because that's the way the world works. But it isn't, folks. It's the way the world has been constructed, and it's a very, very insidious system that could be healed very quickly. We could stop all of this very quickly. I've said so many times, we could heal the world in a day if people simply woke up to themselves. And that has been the point of these shows right since the beginning, is attempting to get people to wake up to themselves and simply see the fiction that they're swimming in. And see how easily we could change this, and how easily we could free ourselves from this control, but how easily we could stop all these wars and stop all this destruction and move in a better direction. I mean, it wouldn't be hard to do, folks. Most people think it's an insurmountable problem, but it isn't. It's our compliance and our tolerance of evil, our tolerance of wrong behavior that causes this whole system to function. If we stop doing that, if we actually step into our moral compass, then the system can't function. It's really that simple. In fact, it's so simple that people can't see the forest for the trees. That's the problem. People want change, but they don't want to change. It's always really been the same old thing, hasn't it? But again, through all of this sort of stuff, even with investigating these sorts of things, it's fun to do. I totally enjoy looking at these sorts of things. But through it all, it's still very important not to lose focus of the world around us, not to lose focus of what the governments are doing. But the thing is, a lot of it is interconnected. Even when you look at things such as the concept of the mud flood, whether this was possible and what caused it, and even when it was caused. I mean, I've suggested it may have happened around 1840, and there is evidence to suggest that, but there's also evidence to suggest that it may have happened around 1600, or perhaps there was two of them. Who knows? But again, if it did actually happen, and evidence would suggest it did, then what caused it is another very interesting question. I mean, it could have been possibly it was done through sonic frequencies, it's possible it was done through electromagnetism, possibly there was a plasma discharge. I mean, no real idea. One might question why that isn't happening. It's just a system of states of stuff. And it's the same saving program. Everyone expecting the white knight. The only way humankind is going to get itself out of this predicament is if we stop complying with our own slavery. We're seeing this happening in France at the moment with the riots and the yellow vests in France, but of course even this seems to have been co-opted as well. As soon as they get a colour involved, you know that there's someone in there spinning things and getting involved. I mean, these colour revolutions really never seem to go in the right direction. And if it's the working class standing up against the government, then why are they smashing shop windows and destroying businesses of the small working class? You know, there may be people in there that are doing the right thing and really want to see change, but of course you get these agents provocateurs in there which turn it into a violent uprising to destroy the economy and continue the same old agenda, which is what it does. Now, a revolution, a violent revolution where you're destroying your local infrastructure is never going to go well, and it's never going to lead your country to freedom. There are better ways to do things. So when you look at this yellow vest so-called revolution in France, you've really got to see that there are elements in there that are probably good, but there's a lot of elements in there that are leading it exactly where the government wants it to go, as they always do with these so-called uprisings, folks.